record on this computer. Click, click, click. All right. Welcome back to another episode of Conversations with Friends. We are about to hit like episode 25 of people who actually wanted to have conversations with me, which is amazing. So where we started and where we're going has become a whole different trajectory, because when I started this, it was a dare. And now mental health is basically my jam. And I'm using this platform mostly for normalizing, having conversations about mental health, because it needs to be normalized the same way we talk about physical health and wellness. We should be talking about mental health and wellness. It should not be something that people feel shame around, etc. So welcome, friends. I'm Dawn Scannell. And today we have Sandra, who I will let you introduce yourself, because nobody knows how to introduce somebody better than ourselves of what you do. So take it away, please, ma'am.
Thank you. So I'm Sandra Goldmeer. I'm the area director for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention here in the Capital Region, but it's actually further than the Capital Region. My territory or area is from Columbia, Greene County in the south, all the way up to St. Lawrence, Franklin, and Clinton in the north. So there's 15 counties in that area. And you pretty much said what a lot of what we say is it's about normalizing, talking about mental health, just like we talk about physical health. And somebody said, we have to remember that our head is part of our body. And so mental health is part of our physical health. And there's so much interconnectedness, especially when we talk about mental health self-care and how we support ourselves and others who are struggling, whether it be with physical health struggles actually affect our mental health. So it's really interconnected. And when we start talking about them holistically and together and not shaming or making people uncomfortable about being able to say, you know what, I have a therapy appointment, or I've been feeling unlike myself and I want to talk to somebody about it. Not only will it hopefully open up the discussion, but it will increase access and more people in the field, because we have a terrible mental health service provider shortage as well.
We sure do. And when there's a stigma wrapped around it, here's the thing I like to point out to people, that it's, your opinion is your opinion. But if you live in a family dynamic and you have people in your family under your roof who are struggling with their mental health, and you have such a stigma that you spread around as your opinion of it, you can be guaranteed that those loved ones in your house are not going to come to you for help or support.
Yep. And that was shown, when the Meghan Markle interview came out and people were slamming her about, I don't believe that she was really in crisis. Even if they haven't, if there are people in your life who are struggling and they hear you comment on that to somebody else, you no longer are a safe person for them to go to.
Right.
And I think that's really a struggle. So it's about normalizing that and making it comfortable for people to have conversations, and really moving forward on that area.
So there was I read an article this weekend and I printed it out, because now they're finding out that a third of COVID survivors have suffered neurological or mental disorders now coming out of it. So 14% anxiety at 17%, and other mood disorders at 14% were the most common, right? And then those who suffered severe COVID and were in intensive care, 7% had a stroke within 6 months, and almost 2% have now been diagnosed with dementia.
Yeah, and that's the other piece too, is that people think that, or we've grown up in a culture, many of us, that think that mental health is, something that we are completely in control of and you have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? Or you have to be strong. You have to be mentally strong, especially men hear that sort of toxic masculinity type commenting. And what we don't realize is that some of this is chemical. And so we don't know what the long-term effects of COVID will be, and how that will affect how our brain functions, and what the neurological issues will be, and that can affect mood.
Absolutely. As well as, that thought just left the gravy train. Gosh darn it. anyway, but the other thing that I've been talking a lot about lately is the fact that, almost 2.5 million women have left the workforce in the last year.
Yeah, and I think there was 1 month last year where every single loss in the workforce was female.
Right. Now,
And so and mental health and COVID impact economically, but also they've seen through mental health has been disproportionately people of color and white and women in general.
right.
I just read an article because I focus a lot on youth, or at least did in my prior life, was about college students or prospective college students and the impact that COVID has had on specifically people who were going to be first time college attendees in their family. And that either due to economics or just due to their fatigue from virtual learning, that they are sort of giving up the dream of going to college. And the comment was, it's going to, for those students, affect for their family an entire generation
Right.
of economic opportunity.
Right. And that's what they're saying about this many women leaving the workforce, because what I've been saying since this has been, talked about the last 3-4 months is, okay, so now we're back at early 1980s numbers of women in the workforce. Please understand that when you start going back into the workforce, you're going to have to fight for everything we've lost in this short year of bowing out of the workforce. We're going to have to fight to bring everything back up. And I just read an article this weekend that said 2 generations, this will be deep. 2 generations of women in the workforce. We're talking about having to get back to pre-pandemic levels of what we worked for and what we have been receiving. That is tragic. And what are the, it's not a hard stretch to talk about all the ramifications as far as mental health wrapped around that. However, I would like to travel back and recapture one thing that you were talking about as far as chemical problems, causing depression, etc. Back when my son, who is now 32, was about to turn 10, his dad walked out on us, left me with a child and 2 mortgages. I went to the doctor because within 6 weeks, I lost like 30 pounds. I wasn't able to focus. So I went to my physician, and she hooked me up with a psychiatrist, and it was scary. If anybody's not gone through the process of going to a psychiatrist versus a psychologist, there was a form I had to fill out in, a questionnaire where I had to answer all the things. And it was intimidating. And I can't tell you, there was at least 3 times where I wanted to walk back out the door rather than face what I was looking at on the paper. And after I went in and sat down with him after he reviewed it, he also told me, it seems to me that you've probably had dysthymia your whole life. And I'm like, what is that? Right? So for those who don't know, it's a low-grade depression, which means you don't bounce back from sadness as quickly as somebody else, but it's not full-on depression where you're in bed for days. It's just like, things hit you a little bit harder. And I was like, that makes so much sense to me. But now, because of the divorce situation, I was clinically depressed. The numbers back then were what? Probably 3 in every 5 people have some sort of mental thing going on. What are the numbers now? I want to believe that it's like 5 out of 5 people are struggling.
Well, no, it says that, that 1 out of every 4 people will have a mental health condition in their lifetime, but that that less than half of those people receive any treatment at all, right? And so it's really about identifying, but it's interesting that you said, what depression looks like, is that we think of depression only as people who are necessarily like, in bed or sad. And for a lot of people, especially when we talk about our warning signs for suicide, is that depression and people who are struggling don't always look like what we think it's supposed to look like. 1, people who struggle are really good at hiding. that they're struggling from other people, because they especially, want to, they don't want to be in pain emotionally. They don't want to be struggling. So they, so they hide a lot. But that, it can look like anger. It can look like anxiety. It can look like sadness. So we really need to learn for all of us. And that's why, when I give our presentations, people are like, oh, I'm not struggling. I don't need to learn about the warning signs, or I don't know anybody. Is that we all need to just sort of be educated about what the warning signs of depression and suicide are, because we never know if we're going to be the person that somebody reaches out to, or that we're the only person who sees the signs. We always, in our presentation, which we give called Talk Saves Lives, we talk about the fact that it is that talk, it is that conversation that can open up the discussion, but you may be the only person that sees those signs to have that discussion. Too many times, people either before or when somebody goes in has a crisis said, oh, I didn't, they talk about it amongst themselves that they were concerned, but don't reach out to the person, partially because there's terrible fear. And it's misconstrued that if you ask somebody if they're struggling, that you will put the thought in their head, and you won't.
Right.
Study after study has shown that especially, actually, I think one of the studies showed that especially for teens, that if you ask them directly, have you thought about suicide, that will actually open up the discussion, because they have been in this sort of tunnel vision thinking that they're the only person who feels this way,
Right.
that nobody can help them, that nobody sees them, and that nobody sees their pain. And so we need to really be willing to have those discussions. And remembering that pain, which is, it can be emotional pain, it can be physical pain, but it doesn't matter. It's pain.
Right. And you do not have to understand the pain to validate it. That's
Absolutely.
the other thing.
But the other thing is you have to remember that we need to not try to fix it either. It's
Correct.
that we most, the best line that they have in ours is that anybody who's never had, a depressive episode knows what it feels like. And so for us to say, oh, I understand what you're feeling, you don't.
Correct.
What you need to be is there and willing to listen and say, I will help you get help. I will look up resources. I will walk with you in somewhere. I will hold your hand when you call the hotline. Whatever it is to make sure that, and to help them stay safe if they are in crisis.
Right. I can remember one of my very good friends, still to this day, when I was going through all of that back then, we worked in the same place. And I remember her coming to me when she could hear me crying at my desk. And she got down on her knees in front of me and put her hands on my knees and looked at me and said, and she's crying. She said, I don't know what to do. I don't know what you're feeling, but please know I'm here. I'm here. I'm here. I'm here. One person did that for me. And that was enough. You know what I mean? That was enough for me to feel like I had a tether to the other part of the world that was outside of me at that time.
And that's exactly what you need. There's a great app called My3, and it's really about having, sort of making those connections, and having it on your phone that these are three people that, you may have talked to ahead of time, that, to be able to say, if I'm ever struggling, can I call you whatever time it is? People are there. And it also has other resource lines, obviously. But and actually Albany County now has a emergency response app too. And I wish I could remember what the name of it is. I'll have to look it up, but and get it for you so you can get it out to your listeners. But there are some of these great apps out now, because we all live on our phones. But you're right. It just takes one person.
It really does. The other thing too was, at the time, my son, who was 9, right? And he sees now that I've got things on my bedside table that I take every day. I have alarms set in my phone so that I take things on a regular basis, right? Because sometimes we have to help with the chemical imbalance while we go through the talk therapy. One does not supersede the other. I want people to understand that if you take something pharmaceutical, that is not giving up, right? Like we can't get inside our own heads and knit back those synapses that aren't connecting. And he came to me one day and he was crying and he's saying, I'm afraid you're going to die. I thought he already knew like suicide. I'm like, buddy, no, I'm good. I'm getting help. He says, yeah, but you have all those things you take. And he went over to my bedside table. What was scaring him was my mother had died like 3 years prior of cancer. And all he knew about all those medications when we went to visit her, when she was on the couch, they were right next to her. So it was this form of reference that, open all the conversations. I'm really glad that my son was able to come to me and ask me so that he wasn't going to his bed every night worried that in, a few months, mom's going to die, because he didn't understand the difference between what I was going through and cancer. Also, I was scared to death to answer the question, have you thought of hurting yourself? Have you given thought to, I was like, well, if I answer yes to that, they're going to take my son away. I'm a single mom now. Right.
Yeah,
and that's what I said to the psychiatrist. I said, I know this is horrible because now I'm answering your question by explaining why I don't want to answer the question. He goes, no. He said, this is a 2-part question. Right. Because then the follow-up question is, if I said, because the answer was absolutely yes. I thought it would be so much easier on the people around me if I would just disappear, right? My son would not have to be he would have closure. He would have something, to work through out of. I'm not saying this was the right thought process, by the way, anybody, but that was my thought process at the time. You can see I'm starting to break out a little bit because I'm being very open and vulnerable here. But the follow-up question is, have you thought how you do it?
Right. Do you have a plan? That is the second question.
Right. But I was like, no, I just want to disappear.
Right. And that is absolutely, it is the first question, and it does have a second question. And that is a common fear too. But I'm so glad too that, at 9, that your son felt comfortable. And I think that is the fact that we need to, when we talk about mental health and we talk about suicide prevention, I tell people all the time that, the most important word in my organization is not suicide, it's prevention. And prevention starts really early. And that's why opening up changing the culture about mental health and discussion is so crucial, because if our children grow up with the culture that we talk about how we feel, that we know that when we feel sad or anxious or worried, that it's okay to talk about it, and that it's been modeled by our parents and everybody else around us, it means that those discussions happen long before there's crisis. And so we can say, what, I am struggling, that this is really freaking me out or stressing me out, or whatever terminology that they want to use, that, that if, the news has been made recently about this awful cyber bullying that was going on that caused 2 youth at this point, they think, to die by suicide in the North Country, that, that we could say, I made this awful mistake and now I'm being threatened, right? And it's making me feel really uncomfortable, that they don't feel like they're alone. And you talk about, that these were thoughts you were having in your head, is that when somebody is in crisis, it's tunnel vision. They don't see another option. They start seeing that is the only way to solve all the problems, and it's not rational, which is why having a rational conversation with somebody in crisis doesn't always work.
Oh, I lost you. I've lost your audio. Are you still there? Still connected?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay. We lost the last bit of what you were saying there.
Oh, so the last bit that I was saying was that, we talk a lot about how people think when they're in crisis, and that they're not thinking clearly, and that it would be similar to saying if somebody were having a heart attack, that at that moment while they're having the heart attack, that's when you should tell them that they should exercise and eat better. No, that's the time to get them care, right? So we
Perfect.
need to not, at the moment that they're in crisis, to start giving them advice and rationalizing with them. They're not in a place for it. What they need is to be heard and listened to and told, just like your friend who sat with her hands on your knees, I see you, I hear you, and I'm here, and I will help you. And that's all they need at that moment. They need to know that somebody's there,
And that
um,
you're seen,
and that
right?
you're seen.
That's
Absolutely.
100% the most important thing. Like somebody sees me right now, exactly as I am, as horrible as it is, but she sees me.
And they
Someone,
aren't scared away by it, because
correct.
it's so fearful to be inside the crisis that for somebody to be able to stand with you in that spot. I don't know how many people have ever watched West Wing, but there's an episode where Leo McGarry talks about a man in a hole. And the man is in a hole, and people keep walking by, like a priest walks by and it says, hey, priest, can you help me? And he throws down a prayer. And then, somebody else walks by, and then a friend walks by and jumps in. And he goes, hey, Joe, what the heck are you doing? And he looks at me, he goes, I've been here before and I know the way out. It's just having somebody there who sees you and sees you in the space that you are and is willing to stand with you in the dark. I had a part, recently where I was in a really dark place and people kept asking me how they could help. And I said, you can't. You just have to be willing to sit with me in the darkness,
Right.
and the light will come. But right now, I just need people who'll sit with me and make sure I don't drown.
Right. I can remember the day that I could see past my nose again, right? As I was coming out of that clinical depression. It was like I was driving home from work and all of a sudden I was looking at the horizon and I was like, oh my God, the sky is so beautiful right now. And then it hit me. I was like, when's the last time you even freaking noticed the sky? Right? Because that tunnel vision that you talk about, it is completely literal. You're not just tunnel vision. It's like you exist in this tunnel that only you are in, right? And everything on the outside of that is virtually invisible to you. It's just getting through this moment, this moment, this moment, this moment. Can I get to bed so that the pain is somewhere else for a couple of hours? Because even in the height of my clinical depression, I couldn't sleep more than 2.5 hours at a time. So let's add sleep deprived on top of it, right? it's oh my goodness. And for anybody who hasn't experienced it, gotta tell you, I mean, if you've known me for a hot minute, people think I'm like, I can remember coworkers saying, you are the happiest depressed person I've ever known.
Yep.
Right? Like, well, we're just human. And of course, we know that you do not want to see that side of me here at work. So I'm going to do my happy dance, right? And it's not just for you, it's also for me to get through the day, right?
But that's also exhausting.
Oh my God, so much. So much.
Right? And I think that, people are going to wonder why, people who are struggling sleep a lot. It's exhausting.
Oh my God. Emotional exhaustion. I would take physical exhaustion any day of the week over emotional exhaustion because I've had both. I've experienced both. And a good night's sleep will cure, eliminate a whole lot of physical exhaustion, right?
Right. But the interesting thing that often it's physical activity, which helps emotional exhaustion, right? Sometimes when I'm in, when we talk about mental health self-care, one of the things, are a lot of it is physicality. And so people don't realize, and I know you have Jessica Padula, hopefully that you'll get to speak to, and because she did a 48-mile run to raise some awareness about mental health and suicide. And really that, we did a hard hike over the weekend. We hiked Catterskill Falls and it was, 5 miles round trip. And I'm not in such great physical shape. And so I was pretty tired, but I felt great and I slept better and, my mood was good. And, is that taking care of yourself physically? Sometimes when I feel like I'm constantly tired, I'm like, I really need to go work out more. And people are like, doesn't that go backwards? I'm like, no. Right. The physical activity will help. It releases endorphins. It helps with all other things that will help with your mental health self-care. And that's why eating well, sleeping well, getting out and doing physical things, notice, savoring a pretty sky, all of those things help your mental health. And physical activity and physical health are a huge part of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Nope. Yeah, it'll come back to me. Let's throw this out there for anybody who doesn't know. I know you don't know, Sandra, but I went through 10 plus years ago. Oh God, it's got to be close to 16 years ago. I had cyclical bouts of viral meningitis, like 3 in a row. And my short-term memory, not what it used to be at all. But yes, the whole physical and mental, the brain and the body, really, right? To get it at your best place, you really have to connect them by any means necessary.
Right, but and it goes back to what you said too, though, is that especially for people in who are suicidal or who have deep depression, is that often it's the mix of psychotherapy and medication that often make the huge difference. Is that we need to fix what could be a chemical imbalance so that we have the capacity to then talk through the other parts, to be able to create coping skills, to do all those pieces, so that we can move forward in a positive way and take positive changes to get better.
Right. So now my late husband, it's been like 7 years, diagnosis to death for him was 8 weeks. So there was no, I didn't have time to mourn along the way. It was fast, it was messy, and I spent probably close to 2 years, so much in my head, right? Going over what did I miss, right? How could I have seen things ahead of time and changed the outcome? Did I do all the right things? Did I say the right things? Did I say the wrong things, in that 8 weeks time? Did I spend enough time focusing on the right things, and it made it about him? Did I make it about me? And then after he was gone, I journaled myself to pieces, right? Going over all of these things. And then I got to a point where I was like, oh, I need to get back in my body, right? I was literally living 24/7 up in my head. And I was like, I signed up for yoga teacher training. I was like, I don't know how else to do this, but like some kind of boot camp. Yoga has always been good to me, although I hadn't practiced with any regularity in years. I was like, I'm doing it. It was 100% the right choice. 100% the right choice. Broke me open in ways that for somebody who had spent that much time in my head going all over all of the things, there was still so much work to be done. But it wasn't until I brought my body back into the mix that I was able to reconcile so much of what I had been doing in my head.
Yeah, no, absolutely. When I was younger, and this was like in my late teens, but I was swimming laps for a long time. And one of the things that I often did when I swim laps was that's when I would do all my thinking, right? I would, or when I do long walks, because I was walking, sometimes 10 and 12 miles at a clip last summer, preparing for a long walk, and that we did for AFSP. And, what are you going to do for 3 or 4 hours when you're walking other than think? But it was a great, I was out there and I would sometimes call people and do long conversations with them and talk things through or think through stuff and listen to music. That's it helps you get in that space to do it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I know people who do it and that's when they have their cries, is while they're running or while they're, I took a NIA class once that did that for me. I don't know why, but it kicked into something and, it's okay. That's
right. While he was still here, I would go on walks. And that's all it was about. It was about getting out enough of the angst in order to, when I was back at home, I was present,
right.
And I'd go out there and I'd take the dogs for like 3 or 4 miles. When we started, I could barely, because I lived at the top of a small twirly mountain down in Westchester County. And so there was a lot of, up and down terrain, and I hadn't done anything physical for a while. So when I first started, man, I couldn't go very far, but every day I went a little further. Every day I went a little further. By the end of it, I was, running upstairs that I had huffed and puffed up before. And the physical part of it is 100% part of the method of putting yourself back together, if I could put it like that.
And I think we need to remember that, while we, there are so many pieces to changing this culture about mental health, about being smart about mental health. And it's not only about opening discussion. It's not only about being willing to talk to other people. It's about being willing to take care of ourselves in other ways, and knowing that by doing that, we're going to help ourselves. Is that, when I talk to a lot of the people who are active physically, whether it be, in community structures. I used to be a CrossFitter. So I've done some presentations for CrossFit, and they talk about that, that culture, as some people think my kids call it the crazy gym. But the best part about the CrossFit culture is the community culture, is that you cheer loudest for the person who's last.
Right.
And that there's something so self-affirming about that, about the fact that, the way that you've scaled appropriately in CrossFit is when everybody finishes at the same time. They may not be running the same distance. They may not be lifting the same amount, but if you've scaled appropriately and you all finish at the same time, then and if the person who is the weakest or can do the least has scaled appropriately and they finish at the same time as the fastest person, then they've scaled appropriately for the day, as long as you've worked out, right? So it's about finding what works for you. And that is really, and it's like a puzzle of building all those pieces for yourself, for your, we go to see, we get a physical every year, but we don't, and we have a doctor that we put down on our, on our forms, who is your primary care physician, but we don't have somebody that we have developed to check in with, to just do an annual check of, these are the things that are that I'm dealing with. Because then sometimes from the outside, somebody will look and say, you're dealing with a lot. Like, if people are doing this, that's a lot to deal with. That's a heavy load to lift. And for most of us, we're like, well, that's just my life. But to be able to have somebody who will affirm that and say, what are you doing to take care of yourself? Because that's a lot.
Right. Yeah. And that's how I operate. I'm a coach. I call myself a resilience coach. If that's not wrapped around mental health, I don't know what is. But I talk about, the supporting players, right? Your roots are based in gratitude. Your roots are based in self-love. Your roots are based in, I don't want to talk out of my butt. Gratitude, mindfulness, and self-love, right? Sprinkle on your mental and physical wellness. Right. And then who shines the light on it? Our sacred support circle. Like, those are the things I help people work on, like really knowing, like we were talking about at the beginning, who your sacred support circle is, because those are the people you can call anytime to pick you up. Right.
Well, and I think what you said is really important, is that, people think, well, kids are resilient. Well, they're not born resilient. You have to teach resiliency. It's a muscle, right?
That's what I tell people all the time. Practice.
That resilience is a muscle, and that we need to work on, is that the biggest, stressor that we've had this year, the teens have had, is all of this change, right? And that we're like, as adults, it's easy for us to say, it's just prom, or it's just, it's just a birthday party. You'll have more of them, or it's just a prom. It's not a big deal in the long line of your life, but that's not the way it looks from the perspective of a young person who doesn't have that life experience.
Correct.
So we just need to remember that the stressors that they see as stressful, even if we don't see them as stressful, we need to honor them.
Right. And validate them.
We need to validate them and say, I'm sure this is really hard for you. While you can't do that, how can I help you honor it in a different way? What can we do? I just got a graduation announcement from a friend of mine, and for their high school graduate and their college graduate, because they're 4 years apart, and they're having a huge picnic out in a park. socially distanced. It's so cute. They're actually inviting each person to wear the t-shirt from their alma mater. So everybody's supposed to sort of come to graduation with their like either college or high school t-shirt or colors on, which I think is really fun. And it's just a way to honor the experience, is to honor the event. And that might be virtual for some people. That might be, in other ways. It's really about, but we really just need to acknowledge that there's loss. And that's the other thing, is that there has been collective trauma and grief for the last year. And people are like, nah, it's not been, we're fine. It's going to be a long time before we all, recover. And normal is going to be a new normal. It will be different and not necessarily the same.
And that doesn't mean it's going to be bad.
And it doesn't mean it's going to be bad, but it's going to take time. And it's about being patient with ourselves and patient with others.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And honestly, honoring where they're at, those teens or children, right, in their collective tunnel vision trauma of looking at things that they are losing. Let's also remember that brain development your brain development is not done until you're in your mid-20s now, right?
Correct. Especially for men.
Right. Okay, so there's that plus life experience. Like, I'm going to be 60 this year. So I try really hard when I find myself trying to throw out there, well, I've been through some things. It's like, no, it's never appropriate, right? That never hits right. And my experiences are always going to be different from everybody else's experiences, but also the trauma we have all been through this past year. Let's also acknowledge that those of us who have been through trauma prior to this last year, we now have layers of trauma that have been built on top of the other trauma, right? Because how this trauma has hit us this last year is affected by the other traumas that we've lived through.
Right.
Yes?
Absolutely.
Which is, again, that's a way of me trying to get you to see that how anybody else is handling this last year, if it looks different than to how you've dealt with it, try not to judge. You have no idea what other people's traumas have been in their life.
Absolutely.
Right? Kindness goes a really long way. A smile costs you nothing. Looking people in the eye costs you nothing. Even with a mask on, you can still look people in the eye and try and smile through your eyes. We've all been so alone, right? We've been so isolated. I went to the grocery store a couple of times in the last couple of weeks. Honestly, my husband's been doing all that work, and I have a lot of stuff brought into the house. I go out very little. And so it's even that is anxiety provoking now, right?
Yeah, it is. We were so excited yesterday. We finally got, for anybody who has their vaccine appointment, especially in the capital region, if you check up every once in a while, sometimes other appointments open up. And my 60-year-old said to me, why don't you check? Well, it turns out that was at 4:00 yesterday afternoon. And they had a 6:00 appointment at SUNY. So we got him signed up and we walked him over. And of course, being a minor, you have to go with him. So not only can he not drive himself, but there's a piece of like, it's just like a key to possible future freedom to know that he's the fourth out of the four of us in our household to start the process. And so it's exciting that he will, in 3 weeks, we will have an entirely full family vaccination, which means we can start to get out and go places. But it doesn't mean that things, we're two of us are fully vaccinated. We're still wearing our masks. We went on a hike, still wearing them. And we all need to still do that until, and we're going to be wearing masks for a long time.
Right.
People just need to continue, because it's, now it's just, our littlest kids, they're like, yeah, whatever, we wear them. That's what they know. It's all they know.
Exactly. So, it's like, well, you can't go to school without your shoes. Oh, okay. You can't go
put your seatbelt on in the car. Just
correct. Like, I don't even understand all the palaver about the mask wearing. It's like, come on, people, no shoes, no shirts, no service. Are you protesting that?
Put your mask on and keep going.
Yeah. Do you wear
Especially because, there are people, and I'm a big believer, there are people who can't wear them. So the rest of us should, that's
Exactly.
my opinion. I mean, I don't want to fight people over their opinion and their feeling about, what their rights should be. But I just feel like, some things, hopefully we can move forward in a way that we will start to be able to see things open. And our major events are in the fall. We do some wonderful walks to honor people who struggle and people we've lost to suicide. And we will, we are planning for them to be wide open this summer. We're doing a hike this spring at Prospect Mountain, and we're going to do that one open and out in the, because of how important physical activity is. But we even have it so that if people who aren't comfortable going where there's groups, we have a whole list of fun other hikes they can do and ways they can participate, even if they don't hike with us, so that they're still getting out there and honoring that need to do physical activity to move forward the needle on their mental health as well.
Awesome. And that's one of the things. Hey, it just came back. Personal wellness, right, is intrinsically linked, right? Like drinking enough water, working on your sleep, all of that is not separate. The physical health and wellness is not separate at all from your mental health and wellness. The more you try to be on top of your physical health and wellness will absolutely impact how you can deal with your mental health and wellness as well, right?
Yeah.
Water, eating more good things than bad, right? I know when I've overdone the sugar, because I'll go to bed at night and I'll feel like, I'm running hot is the only way I can describe it. Like, I'm having a really hard time cooling down and relaxing. And it's like, yeah, Dawn, if you think about it for a hot minute, you've probably ingested way too much sugar over the last 2 or 3 days. I absolutely know I'm a fully functioning adult and I know how sugar affects me. And yet it's so easy to fall into time and time again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, they tell you, all the time is that if, when you think you're hungry, what you are is thirsty.
Correct.
And especially at night when I'm nibbly, I should be drinking water. I'm not very good at it. But I mean, most of us are not as hydrated as we should be. I mean, according to some study, you're supposed to take your body weight, divide it in half, and that's how many ounces a day you're supposed to be drinking. Most of us do not. My son just harumphed in the background. Like any of us do that. But I mean, I've done it occasionally, and actually after a day or two, you stop living in the bathroom because your system realizes you're not going to drown yourself in water, but you do feel better.
Yeah, you absolutely do.
But it's not easy, especially for those of us who are a little larger. Drinking a couple of quarts of water a day is a lot, but it's good for you. And it also reduces, it helps with everything. It helps with the way your brain processes, helps with your skin. It helps with your
joints,
appetite. The word was appetite, joints, all of those things. And then you were talking about sugar. I went off sugar, gluten, and dairy at one point a couple of years ago, and I felt fabulous. Right. It's not sustainable for me because I just am too much of a carb and sugar addict, but I felt fabulous.
Yeah.
And it proved that, that's all anti-inflammatory. The biggest inflammatory things are gluten and sugar. So, it's hard to be without them, but even if you go off them for a little bit, it's amazing what it does for your joints.
Absolutely does. Yeah. Cause I had gotten a few months back, because the pandemic, let's talk about bread baking. I was baking things. There's just 2 of us in this house. I was baking muffins once a week. I was baking cookies. Bread was coming out the wazoo. And there got to a point where I was like, my left knee was in such pain, like I had twisted it at some point and couldn't remember. I was like, I have never had problems with this knee ever. And so I cut back on everything. And within 3 days, that knee was fine. I was like, oh, dear Lord.
Yes. Inflammatory response from gluten. Yes, that's
yeah. My hands don't work. What is wrong with me? Did I age overnight? No, Dawn, just stop eating that stuff.
It's about moderation. It's all about moderation. Yes. And I think that it goes to that with our mental health too, is that it's about, we talk about exercise, we talk about how important all that is. Of course, if somebody's people can use, unfortunately, exercise as an addiction too. It's about it's about finding a balance. It's about trying to lead a balanced life. And, I am not a professional, mental health or otherwise in that. All I do is advocate for us to take, is to talk about our care, is to work, is to connect with the professionals, whether it be a mental health professional, physical health professional, put together a team for yourself so that, you have those resources, both from the physical medical side and from the mental health medical side, and really, be honest. You were talking about, being afraid to give those answers. Be honest, because that is the only way that we are going to take care of ourselves, is to be honest with ourselves and with each other, and be willing and not be judgmental about it. It goes back to what we said in the beginning. It's that we need to change this culture and be smart about mental health. And if we started to, people are more than willing to tell us about the aches and pains in their body, right?
Yes, 100%.
But people are not willing to say, I'm really struggling, and people see it anyway, but they're not willing to talk about it. And they're not going to answer. And we need more people. I'm just still keep talking about your friend who was on her knees, just saying, I see you. And you only need one.
Seriously. Yep.
So.
Yeah. Literally felt like I had a tether to the outside world, outside of myself.
Yeah, it's a great visual. That is exactly what it is that sometimes all people need is that lifeline. And that's why, suicide prevention hotline, it is a lifeline. It's somewhere for people to call. And we have a New York State Hope or Care. There's a New York State one too, that I keep seeing advertisements about on television, but it's just, having somebody to call and having somebody to talk to, and knowing that, but as I said before, it's about those conversations long before there's crisis. It's about just being willing to have those conversations and also develop some of those skills. You were talking about journaling, being able to write it down, so that even if you can't tell somebody, you can say, can you read that? Giving somebody just said, I need you to read this. Or you can email it to someone and say, I can't say it out loud because it's too hard to say, but you can write it down and then send it to someone and say, so that they know. And, and it goes back to, it's about those two questions, is that many of us have had moments in our life in which we are struggling. A lot of people have what we call lived experience, where they have had thoughts of ending their life, or that, but, we need to be able to reach out or know that it's okay to tell somebody that we've gotten to a point where we have a plan and we are in danger, so we can get the help that we need.
Right. Because the alternative isn't good and is very messy emotionally for everyone involved.
Absolutely.
Is there anything?
That's the thing that people don't know, is that, when somebody dies by suicide, we often hear people say, well, how could they have done that to us? And it goes back to that tunnel vision, is that what they wanted to be most of the time is out of pain. And it's just a desire. It's a deep desire to end pain. Most people who die by suicide are ambivalent about taking their life. What they just want to be is out of pain.
Right. And if you could, for once, just put yourself in the mindset of what it must feel like to feel like that is your only way.
Well, we use this example that said, if somebody thinks about the most physical pain they've ever been in, whatever that is, could be childbirth, could be kidney stone, could be broken knee, a knee injury, whatever it is. If in that moment somebody asked you to give clear and accurate directions to your house, would you have been able to do that when in that moment of pain? Well, the answer is no for most people. That's what, when somebody is in crisis, they are not thinking clearly. They just want to be out of pain. And so, but we also know that it passes quickly. It can pass quickly, right? That moment of crisis, not the overall feelings, but the moment of crisis. And so it's about being able to call somebody when you're in that space, or being able to have somebody see you when you're in that space, so they can throw you that lifeline, so that they can hold you there until that intensity passes. And so they can keep, we were talking before the call about a little bit about gun safety, right? About keeping environments safe for people in crisis, whether it be gun, whether it be whatever their chosen method is. Because one of the things people don't always know is that if somebody is in crisis and the method they've had on their mind, if they have a plan, is not available to them, they will not pick another method.
Really?
Yeah. Research has shown that most people who have a method in mind, if in crisis and that method is not available, will not immediately pick another method. Therefore, there's an opportunity for the crisis to pass and for them to get to help. So, they won't immediately pick another method. So therefore, there is this opportunity. So it's about, if we know somebody is struggling, is to make sure that they have a safe environment so that they don't have methods available to them, so that we can help them get through that crisis and get to the help that they may need. But as I said, it's still about having people have discussions long before they get to that point. So it's a mixture of both. Yeah.
Right. Because the work to be done is with people who are already here, but also understanding that we have the opportunity with every new person that is born into the planet to change how we help them develop, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Right. So we could stop telling little boys that boys don't cry, that boys have to be strong, that boys are built of different things, when really, basically on the inside, we're all the same. We may have a couple of different body parts, but they are built just like us
Right.
up here. So we just need to change a lot of things.
Absolutely. Yep.
A lot of things. Is there anything you would like to leave us with that you don't want to leave unsaid before we wrap?
I do want to give the hotline number, because I think that it's crucial that people know the hotline number. It's 1-800-273-TALK or 8255. But for those people who don't want to have to pick up a phone and talk to someone, but could text it if they're struggling, or even if they know somebody else who they're concerned about, you can call that hotline. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. But you can also text the word TALK to 741-741. The other thing is that we have so much going on, educational programming for all age groups, from preschoolers. We just actually have a picture book. We were talking about young people and how they talk about emotions and feelings. We're launching a new program called Gizmo's Possum Guide to Mental Health. But you can check them out at our website, which is afsp.org/capital-region-NY. There's also a lot at afsp.org, because that's our national one. There's tons of ways for people to get involved if they are passionate about mental health like you are. We need more people to walk with us, to get engaged with us, to volunteer with us. And so I would be remiss if I didn't tell people that. We do have our Hike for Hope in May that people can get involved in, which is on our website. I don't want to give too many web things or people will forget that. So afsp.org/capital-region-NY will get everybody all the information.
Awesome. I'll also get the links and have them with this post. When this interview goes out, all those links will be there too. If for some reason you're still like, I can't find the things, because it happens.
Yep.
You know how to find me. If you're a listener of mine, you know how to find me. Don't be afraid to reach out, slide into my DMs and say, hey, where's this? Where's that? And I'll hook you.
We're also on Facebook too. You can find AFSP Capital Region New York or American Foundation for Suicide Prevention Capital Region New York. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We put out a lot of positive social media graphics about mental health, which you're welcome to share widely, which we encourage. They're available on our websites too, on the national one, to really put out positive messaging, to sort of balance out some of the negative media that we see on social media that we all live on. It's great to have that positive messaging as well. Absolutely. And just, be willing to reach out and be that tether for somebody else, to be that lifeline.
Right. Because contacting these organizations is not just for the people who are suffering. You want to be an ally, you want to be an advocate, reach out and find out how you can help. Reach out and say, I don't know what the signs are. Educate me.
Right. Right. And it's really, as I said before, I said, we've had in the past people like, oh, I don't want to get involved because, suicide is in the name. Remember, it's about prevention. We get involved with the American Cancer Society, whether you've had cancer or not, right? Because we want to make sure people don't die by cancer. Same thing. We want to make sure that people take care of their mental health and that we live in a world where we can stop suicide, because one death by suicide is too many. We had 1,793 or 1,723 in 2019 deaths by suicide.
Is that New York State?
New York State, yeah. We didn't talk about the fact that the suicide rate has actually dropped a little bit nationally. And it's important to know that. People are like, well, but people keep talking about the crisis in mental health. It is. But the reality is that one of the reasons that it's maybe one of the only silver linings of COVID is that it's the first pandemic where we are talking about mental health, and more people are going, if they're struggling, to get mental health help when they can find it. And so we may actually be saving lives by talking about it more, which is exactly what we should be doing. Is the more we talk about it, the more we have amazing programs like what you're doing now. So thank you so very much. Is that it really does impact whether people will reach out if they're in crisis, and we will save lives by having these discussions.
Right. Absolutely. Normalizing it. Just normalize it. Like, people are like, oh, all these new trans kids, this, that, right? And the LBGQ, whatever the rest of the letters are that I never remember. Right? Like, oh, why is it so prevalent now? Because they've made it their job to normalize it in society.
Yeah. Right? The more that we talk about it, right? Because, and suicide rates are enhanced in that community because people don't talk about it, because there's so much stigma there too. So the more that we talk about it, we talked before this show about mental health in men. I mean, there's just so much. We could talk for 2 or 3 more hours on this. Yes. But you'll have other programs that will talk about it too. It's just that there are, it's about opening up the discussion. It's about the fact that talk saves lives. And that is our keystone program for a reason, because we all need to talk about it. We all need to be comfortable talking about it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you for being willing to be on my little podcast. If it helps one person, every one of these conversations, I'm like, if the one right person gets the message and changes what's going on in their life, winning.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a really good day, and I'll be in touch. Bye, everybody.